Let me go live on TikTok. And thank you for joining me, everyone, on TikTok. As I prepare to launch my live program, let me go live on Zoom. And we shall be rolling at that point. Let's just see. Here we go. Bear with me for a second as I crank up my old-fashioned machine here. A live stream call-in. By the way, this is a call-in program. We are live. 617-396-4958. That is the number if you'd like to join the conversation. 617-396-4958 is the number. And let me just see, can I record? Yeah, record on computer, done. I'm ready to roll. Thank you very much for joining me, everyone. This is Charles Moskowitz. I'm doing the program Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I think that from what I've been told, I'm the only person right now who is actually doing a live program with phone calls online. And I can take calls, and I'm hoping to build a live audience. Already have done as such. I started Monday, and I'm determined to, and I'm dedicated to doing this Monday through Friday at 12 noon to 1 or longer, depending upon calls. You're welcome to join the conversation. What's on your mind this afternoon? 617-396-4958. That's 617-396-4958. Let me just fix my comb over a little bit there. Look, I don't even really want to discuss per se, although I suppose we have to, this really disgusting and loathsome attempt to stab President Trump further in the back by trying to impeach him again on nothing, a phony impeachment in his last week, assumedly in office. It's ugly, it's spiteful, it's vindictive, and it really is an attempt to not only bury him and his legacy and the possibility that he may come back, which I think they really fear, but it's also an attempt to destroy the rest of us. And I think we are entering into some very troubling times. I will say, for the record, that I don't know, frankly, in the present atmosphere that we're in, whether or not I'll be here doing this again tomorrow. I don't know. Tomorrow morning, I might wake up and find that all of my media has been canceled. I don't know. This is if they can cancel the president of the United States and they can cancel significant American patriots like Sidney Powell and General Michael Flynn off of Twitter, are they, doing anything wrong other than expressing themselves? Then they can cancel a little yokel like me in 2 seconds and nobody would even notice. So that's where we are. I don't know where to proceed with that. I mean, I have no control over that. They are using really hateful terms, lies. Somehow now we're all insurrectionists, right? We're terrorists, I was told. The other day, somebody sent me a TikTok saying I'm a terrorist. Why? They didn't explain. I guess that now to support President Trump, to believe and to claim and to argue that the election had been stolen, that is the equivalence of terrorism. Now, let me just be clear about that question, and that is that while it appears to me that personally and from my own observation that the election was stolen, and while we're never going to really know for sure, because I would suggest there was a conspiracy on the part of the media, on the part of the courts, both state and national and Supreme Court, and on the part of state governments and finally of Congress, to not allow the evidence to be presented in its proper forum, which would have been in a courtroom or would have been on the floor of Congress. We're never going to get that. So we're never really going to have the debate and the evidence presented in its proper forum And we'll never have real resolution in terms of the degree by which the election was either stolen or it wasn't stolen. We're not going to get that, so it's been blocked. So anybody who tells you, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist, you don't know what you're talking about, you could just point out that we are never going to know for sure because the ability to get the evidence presented in its right forum has been prevented. And that's where I am with it. But having said that, I will support whoever is inaugurated next Wednesday, whether it be Donald Trump or Joe Biden. That person, at that point, when they take the oath of office, that person will be my president, whether it be Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Whether the election was stolen or not, at that point, we have to recognize that this is our government, and we have to accept it, in my opinion. So if Biden is if he is inaugurated, then he will be my president, and I will go into a loyal opposition. I will praise him when he does right, and I will criticize him when he's wrong, but I will not say, I'm not going to do like what the communist left did. He's not my president, which is what they said about Trump, even though in the case of Donald Trump, there was no controversy over the fact that he did win. I mean, that wasn't even, a controversy. They just decided out of whim that they would not recognize him. I won't be accepting somebody who steals. Okay, fine. No, they're entitled to that. I'm reading a TikTok. I don't accept the theft, but I accept the fact that we have to have a consistent government, and I will oppose it in every way I can. I want to make sure I will continue to talk out about the steal. I will continue to ask people who understand this to speak out about it, and hopefully continue with lawsuits. I hope to have on this program, and I'm sure I will have on this program in coming weeks, Sidney Powell and General Michael Flynn and Rudolph Giuliani and and all of the rest of the people Joe diGenova, all the people that are sort of on the inside on this and who know what's going on. I will have them on this program, and we'll ask them, and we'll try to get to the bottom of the evidence. I will never give up on that. I'm getting texts from Restream. You're going to support a communist puppet? I'm not going to support the president. I'm simply going to acknowledge the fact that he is the president. We have to have a president. I'm not an anarchist. I don't support it, and I will fight with every ounce of my being to oppose any hint of communist movement forward. And I expect it's going to be a very difficult fight. So anyway, you're welcome to join the conversation, by the way. This is a live program, and we do take calls. And if you call, you will be heard. 617-396-4958. What is on your mind? 617-396-4958. Now, I am almost ready to publish a short book, basically a pamphlet or a novella on the election, my views on the election and why I think it was stolen and what that means. And in the appendix to the book, I will be republishing the incredible inaugural address delivered by Donald Trump on January 20th of 2017. To my way of thinking, this speech, which should be read by every high school student, it should be read by every legal student, every law student, every American should read it. It's simple, it's direct, it's classic Trump. He doesn't engage in the usual totalitarian language that we're used to from both parties, the sophistries, the double talk, the lies. He speaks plainly, he's honest, he's basic, he's truthful. That's what the left hated about Trump. They complained that he was a liar, and yes, he sometimes would tell what Mark Twain called a stretcher. When he described Tom Sawyer, he was involved. He would tell a stretcher, a tall tale, but they were harmless stretchers. They weren't damaging. They weren't the kinds of lies that we're used to hearing from the deep state. Like, if you like your healthcare plan, you can keep your healthcare plan. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Or lies like the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which turned out to be a hoax and which got us involved in the Vietnam War, leading to 50,000 American deaths. Or the lies told by Wilson and FDR with regard to keeping us out of those wars so they could get reelected, knowing that they would get in the war. Those are big lies. Those are the kinds of lies that the authoritarian left tells. Trump was honest in that regard. That's why they hated Trump, because he was honest. Not because he told the occasional fib, which I think was bad. I don't think he needed to do that, because there's so much about him that is bigger than life. I mean, his story, his accomplishments, that he didn't need to resort to that. And it did show kind of a weakness on his part. I mean, no one's perfect. But the honesty of him was amazing. It is something, and his inaugural address is something that we ought to read as a blueprint to go forward in these very, very difficult and perilous times. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it, and I'm going to comment on it. And while I do so, I should add that, if you want to interrupt me and give a phone call, I'll take the call. You're welcome to do it. And if you'd like to do that, we're at 617-396-4958, and I will take your call. You will be heard on the program. Agree or disagree, no problem. I don't mind opposition. I'm not one of those types who's going to screen any call. I welcome any and all phone calls. And I'm doing this every day, by the way, Monday through Friday. And by the way, we might have Michael Shaw coming on briefly to join us. And he's a science writer. He's a chemist. He's written extensively on the COVID-19 virus. He's also joined me in many conversations about the election. So he's always got some great insight. So I think he's going to be up on the program probably at the top of the next hour, I would guess. So anyway, 617-396-4958 is the number, 617-396-4958. So here's Donald Trump's inaugural address, and it is very powerful and very moving. We, the citizens of America, are now joined in a great national effort to rebuild our country and restore its promise for all of our people. Together, we will determine the course of America and the world for many, many years to come. We will face challenges, we will confront hardships, but we will get the job done. Every 4 years, we gather on these steps to carry out the orderly and peaceful transfer of power. And we are grateful to President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama for their gracious aid throughout the transition. They have been magnificent. Thank you. Today's ceremony, however, this is the key. Today's ceremony, however, has very special meaning because today we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C. and giving it back to you, the people. Now, let me just opine on this a little bit, because it's this one sentence that holds the crux of why the deep state, which is what President Trump accurately calls it, the swamp, why they were so pathologically opposed to Donald Trump every single day that he was in office. Indeed, every single day since he descended from the escalator at Trump Tower in the summer of 2015, along with Melania, to announce his candidacy. They hate and they fear Trump for a lot of reasons. Firstly, for personal reasons, because Donald Trump's ascent to office threatened their money, threatened their power, threatened their position, threatened their entire worldview, their ideology. He was transferring power away from this growing informal, bureaucratic, administrative state, as it was called by Steve Bannon. And he was returning those sovereign rights to the sovereign people of America, where it belongs. He was returning the country to its constitutional condition, to its natural condition. He was reasserting the basic American political philosophy, which is that rights come from God and not from the state. You know, Thomas Jefferson laid it out in the Declaration of Independence. We're endowed by our Creator, not by the state, with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable means that they can't be compromised, they cannot be tampered with. And thus, the American system was established on an idea that was not only different than all other governments and ideas that had existed before that, but it was the closest thing to what is the best and natural condition for humanity. That rights do not come from a state, do not come from an elite, an aristocracy, whatever you want to call it, that doles out rights as privileges, as favors to those whom they like and whom they support and who furthers their power, and withholds those same rights from those who oppose them. And they have the right to, they feel the right to punish them. I mean, it's the whole concept of the divine right of kings. They feel that they are God's representatives on earth. They can wield this power. And they have done so by fiat from the beginning of time. And the entire struggle of man, going all the way back to the beginning, has been to become aware of and to become conscious of our natural sovereign rights under God. And this country, this republic, was the first public expression of that idea. Donald Trump was bringing us back to that principle. He's returning those powers to the people. He was an ordinary businessman. He was not part of this corrupt establishment. He was a multi-millionaire who didn't need to take money from them. I mean, unlike so many other of our political leaders, whether it be the Clintons or Obama or all of them. I mean, they all got well, not so much the Bushes, but I mean, certainly Joe Biden and his family. They all got rich from using their public office. Trump didn't need to do that. He didn't need special interests because he was already rich. The United States as a corporation, I believe it is going to be dissolved. Well, first of all, the United States is not a corporation. The United States is a contract between the sovereign people and a limited government, and that contract is the United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence as the preamble. So that, it's been compromised. We could talk a little bit about the history of how that happened, and I'm going to do that right now, because to go back to what President Trump tried to do, which was return the power to the people, he was going up against this, what he calls the deep state, accurately, and what he calls the swamp. And it was that deep state, that swamp, that has been enthroned in this country going back to the election of 1912 and the advent of Woodrow Wilson, who was the first self-described socialist president who changed everything in his first year in office. He implemented the Federal Reserve Act. He implemented the direct income taxes amendment. He eventually implemented World War I and its martial law, and a lot of other things. I mean, it changed America for the worse, in my opinion. And it removed powers from the sovereign citizen. Since then, we have struggled to get it back. Other historic events that furthered this socialistic and internationalist agenda, by which we have surrendered our sovereign rights as citizens, include the emergency legislation that was enacted by Franklin Roosevelt in response to the Depression, the implementation of the United Nations Charter at the end of World War II, the implementation of the national security state by President Harry S. Truman in 1947 when he set up the CIA and the DIA and the National Security Council. These organizations established what President Trump calls the deep state. By the way, there's a very good book called The Double State by Professor Michael Glennon of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I interviewed him. He didn't agree with some of my conclusions, but he respected them, and he's a great guy. But he's like an establishment figure. I mean, he worked as a legal counsel for the U.S. Senate during the Clinton years, and I think he also worked for the Bush administration. And, you know, he's kind of like, we're not talking here about some, tin hat, conspiracy theorist like I've been described. We're talking about an establishment figure. And his book talks about how the creation of the national security apparatus in the late 1940s by executive order of Harry Truman, and Truman didn't necessarily intend this, but this is how it happened, resulted in this huge, massive, expanded deep state that operates informally, that uses government power without being elected. We don't know who these people are. We don't generally know their identity, and that they wield government. They make laws without the approval of the people, which is the only legitimate body that can make laws in this country are the U.S. Congress and state legislators and local city councils, because those are bodies that are elected by people to represent them. And they are the only entities given that kind of prerogative to make decisions, to make laws. And then you have governors and presidents operating as an executive to sign into law those laws, but they don't actually make laws. The laws are made by legislators. And what's happened since the election of 1912 is that the ability and the function of making law has been transferred gradually to unelected bureaucracies and even international authorities like the United Nations and the NGOs and other groups, and even private business organizations, which have made laws and called them something else, directives, guidelines, all these euphemisms. And it's done without the consent of the governed. It's done, usually in their interests. And their interests are a combination of this desire for power that represents a darker side of human nature, and that being fiat power, not legitimate power within the confines of a constitution. Or they're in it for the money, as in the case of, multinational corporations who don't have any loyalty to any government. They have loyalty to themselves and their owners. Or you have people who are mentally ill and they believe in some kind of utopia, that things like national sovereignty and localism and democratic rights and private property ownership and faith in God and family and love and commitment and contractual relationships, that these things are, superstitions. They're anachronisms that should be abolished gradually. This is what has controlled Washington. This is what has controlled our government and increasingly the high ground of our culture since the election of 1912. There have been presidents who opposed it. I think that Warren G. Harding opposed it, and he died in office. I think that John F. Kennedy opposed it, and he died in office. And I think that to a certain extent, Ronald Reagan opposed it. Not totally, but somewhat. He was shot. And I think that Donald Trump, of all of them, most vigorously opposed it and posed as the biggest threat to their fiat power. And in that capacity, they went after him from the minute, as I say, he stepped off the escalator. They could not control Trump because Trump was a self-made man. He wasn't beholden to any special interests. He didn't have to answer to anyone because he didn't need anything from anyone. He was a successful businessman. He was famous. He had a great family. He had all the things in life you could possibly want. He wasn't in it for any ulterior motive. He couldn't be blackmailed. I mean, for God's sake, they put everything about him out there, and it just sort of, he was like, yeah, right, I'm a human being. I'm not perfect. And so, as such, he posed as a genuine threat to their power and their demented view of how things should go in the world. And that is, I think, why they went after him. And he meant what he said when he talked about returning power to the people and how both political parties had become essentially rubber stamps for this unelected, bureaucratic, internationalist cabal. So I'm going to read on a little bit here. And by the way, I'm reading the inaugural address that President Trump delivered in 2017, and I would suggest everyone read it. I mean, it's available, it's online. I'd like to see you have your high school son and daughter read it. Ask your high school civics class to study it. Every American should read this because this is the blueprint not only for where we are as a country right now, but where we need to be going forward in a time where I think power is again being transferred back to this unelected bureaucracy, this deep state, and as such, our individual liberties and our futures are under serious threat. So going back, and by the way, you're welcome to join the conversation. We're doing open lines here. 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. Come on down. So back to the speech. For too long, those in politics have reaped the rewards of government while people have borne the cost. Washington flourished, but the people did not share in its wealth. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. All that changes starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. It belongs to everyone gathered here today and everyone watching all across America. This is your day. This is your celebration. And this, the United States of America, is your country. You know, I feel like I'm tearing up as I read this. I believe that the fact that this speech was delivered and the fact that we did have 4 years of what I would suggest is the most successful presidency possibly since Lincoln, in any objective metric you can name, we could point to that. And more philosophically, more culturally, the fact that this presidency did exactly what the deep state feared it would do. And by the way, if the deep state hadn't been so fierce, we can only imagine how successful this would have been. I mean, this was under siege did these successes take place. It would have been astronomical what could have been done. I mean, this is what is really sad about this. I mean, the opportunities and the abilities to move forward here were so enormous for all of us, and it's all over. I mean, they succeeded in stopping it for now, although let's continue to talk about that. But the point is that, where was I? I mean, I kind of am losing my train of thought here. The thing is that that most people, I think, in the course of this past 4 years, have woken up. Enough of us have, that they have woken up the sleeping giant, as Yamamoto said. I have a great quote here from him. He was the Japanese admiral who masterminded the Pearl Harbor attack. He says, this was in his diary, Izoku Yamamoto, quote, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Yes, indeed. The sleeping giant is awake. We are woke in the real sense, and they know it. And I think the fact that Trump won the election and probably won the popular vote is all the more evidence of this. And we ain't going away. They can censor us. I don't know what they have in mind. I mean, there are people who are talking about, there was this one guy who apparently was talking about sending the children of Trump supporters to re-education camp. Does that surprise me? Should we be concerned about that? Oh, no, that could never happen in America, right? Did we ever think in America that we would have, in the name of a virus, which is a terrible disease, certainly, people being put into a medical, martial law where they would be locked down and that they couldn't go out, or they could face criminal charges? We could have governors taking over like fascistic powers to arbitrarily decide how this is enforced. I mean, we could look at examples in particularly the blue states. We could point to Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan deciding, well, we're going to ban the purchase of gardening utensils and seeds, but we're going to allow booze and lottery tickets. I mean, it's arbitrary powers, and we've gotten used to that. We've gotten used to this total lockdown. It's still going on now. Now there are people who are talking about, if anything, expanding it. And then we have, over the summer, the really strange and inverse phenomena of gangs, basically looting Black businesses, burning Black neighborhoods, murdering Black people, particularly children included. And all of this is, we're told, is standing up for the civil rights of Black people. Really? I mean, it's almost like a strange juxtaposition, and that was completely supported by our liberal left politicians, like my own state House member Ayanna Pressley, who said we should have more protests, so-called, or Vice Presidential nominee Kamala Harris and others who said, "Oh, this is all good." You know how many Black businesses may never recover from this, and had their entire enterprise destroyed, and we're all told that there was something good about this? Oh, that's not insurrection. That's not terrorism. And then, of course, the third event was the stealing of the election. And now we're being told that we're enemies of the people. It's not a surprise. This is overreach. I mean, they feel drunk with power. I mean, they feel intoxicated. If they can steal an election, if they can get everyone to be locked down, if they can loot neighborhoods, then why not? Why not take the next step and declare us all terrorists and insurrectionists and have us removed from at least the public space of being able to at least communicate, the means of communication. Look up the dictionary definition of socialism, at least before they tried to change it in the newer dictionaries, public ownership of the means of communication, public ownership of the means of production, public ownership of the means of distribution. That's what socialism is. That's what National Socialism is, essentially. And, of course, some people are going to say, oh, well, I mean, these companies are private companies. Well, I have news for you. The definition of fascism is when you have certain select private companies operating in tandem with a government at the expense of their competitors and at the expense of the citizens to run the public sphere. That's what fascism is. Mussolini's government, instead of having a parliament or a Congress, he had a council of corporations, companies, so-called private companies. These companies were invited into the council because they were doing the bidding of the fascist dictator. They were in cahoots. I mean, they worked in combination with each other. They yielded monopolistic powers. Well, what do you think is going on now with Google and Twitter and Apple banning the president of the United States, taking down Parler, which was a competitor and which allowed more freedom of speech? I mean, I'm looking at my TikTok channel every day and seeing the people I'm following, and I'm seeing percentages of them have been removed. I'm just waiting for them to remove me. I suppose that might be inevitable. That's why, by the way, I'm doing these multiple streams with the hope that if they take one down, I can still have the others. I'm determined to move forward. I want to do this every day, as long as I have some venue to do it. I mean, I suppose if they take them all away, and they'll just pull the plug, then I don't know, maybe I'll stand out on the street corner with a bullhorn. I don't know. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. This is the definition of fascism. Companies like Google and companies like Twitter, they know they can get away with this because they know, and they're emboldened by the fact that the incoming administration is not going to do anything about it, and that implicitly they're going to be in cahoots with them, right? That is what fascism is. It is not outright public ownership like they had in the Soviet Union. It is more of a public-private partnership, which is what they had in fascist Italy and Nazi Germany and all of the other national socialist states, as opposed to the international socialist state, where the government itself becomes the corporation. That's what we're dealing with right now. That's what we're dealing with going forward. We are entering into a time of major advance for fascism. And when I say fascism and Nazism, I'm not saying that Biden and these deep state establishment people are anti-Semitic, at least not in the literal sense that they're going to put Jews in concentration camps. They may not like Judaism because they don't like God, but I mean it more in that they're going to get rid of their political opponents. They're going to get rid of their political enemies, at least by having them censored, if not worse. And if anyone doesn't think that it can't get worse, I'm sorry, but you're naive. Maybe I feel this way because I'm a Jew and because I have grown up hearing about relatives and in previous generation who were murdered in the Nazi Holocaust, and because I grew up fascinated by this subject and studying it. And since then, I've written several books about it, all of which are available, by the way, at Amazon Books, not to get in a little plug. But my sensitivity on this subject is maybe a bit more acute than some, but it's there, and I do believe that it is a time of grave peril, and that what is possible now would have been unthinkable even a few months ago. And therefore, looking forward, I think it could get worse. I think it could get a lot worse. Anyway, You're welcome to join the conversation today. I mean, we have open lines. You know, I started the program on Monday and the phone lines lit up. Today, not so much. Maybe we're all just stunned and thinking about this. 617-396-4958 is the number. If you'd like to join the broadcast, you can call just using a good old-fashioned conventional phone, and you'll be on the air. We can talk about these or any issues that you care to talk about within the confines of community standards, of course. 617-396-4958. That's 617-396-4958. Now, let me get back to President Trump's amazing speech. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. Because I'm repeating here. Because what truly matters is not what truly controls our government, but whether our government is controlled by the people. January 20, 2017 will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again. The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Everyone is listening to you now. You come by the tens of millions to become a part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens. Americans want great schools for their children, safe neighborhoods for their families, and good jobs for themselves. These are just and reasonable demands of righteous people and a righteous public. But for too many of our citizens, a different reality exists. Okay, so you have President Trump noting, and this is something we should remember and think about going forward, that, quote, a nation exists to serve its citizens. Now, this is the kind of rhetoric that in the mouths of usual conventional politicians like Barack Obama or the Bushes, sounds good. We should note they always talked a pretty good game about stopping illegal immigration. But we all knew that they didn't really mean it. They were just saying it to get elected. They were saying it because it sounds good. Donald Trump meant it and that's why it resonated with people. And that's why his presidency has launched this unprecedented movement. Because he actually did understand that the purpose of government, and particularly the purpose of the American government explicitly, is to serve the people. The government is not the origin of power. The government doesn't grant you rights. Your rights come from God, the creator, as Jefferson said, or nature and nature's God, which also Jefferson said. Not from the state. Even if you're an atheist, you ought to understand that your rights as a citizen, as an individual, and the whole concept of citizenship came from the ancient Greeks, but the whole idea of your sovereign person on this planet and your ability to exercise such sovereignty in a limited capacity of being a human being, an imperfect being, over yourself to the degree we can, and over your destiny and that of your family, is a natural right. And that we establish governments to protect, preserve, and to defend those rights, not the other way around. The other way around holds that government controls rights and they give them to people out of either a sense of benevolence or they deny them out of a sense of punishment because they know better. They are the source of rights. I mean, those ideas have always, we've always struggled. Every generation has struggled with people and in power who seek to assert and usurp those rights. I think in modern times, this concept was developed by philosophers like Hegel and Kant and Marx and others. But the American system is a rejection of that and a return to the natural rights emanating from God. Donald Trump meant this when he said it. When you victims, MAGA, realize the truth, you should seek mental health. Oh, this guy's been trolling me on TikTok for a while. Maybe we should all be committed to a mental hospital. I think there are some people on the left who would do exactly that if they get power. We'll all be declared mentally insane because we don't goose step to the left, because we're not zig-heiling to the authoritarian state, and we'll all be relegated to some kind of a mental treatment. Yeah, I mean, the whole science, if you will, of psychology and psychiatry is all about that anyways, frankly. It's about control. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't a legitimate discipline of psychology, something which used to be primarily handled by clerics. But this, the scientizing of this has been one that has always worked hand in glove with elites, both inside and outside of governments, to control people by means of manipulation of the senses, the senses, by manipulating our emotions. And they also take on the intoxicating power, complete fiat power, of deciding who is mentally ill and who isn't. Anyway, getting back to my reading of President Trump's speech, I'm going to go back to that. And by the way, you're welcome to join the conversation. 617-396-4958. Come on down. Not getting a lot of calls today. I will say yesterday and Monday, the phone lines are lit up like a Christmas tree. I don't know why today people are not calling. It looks like I've got a lot of listeners. I'm looking at some of the stats, but I guess, I don't know, is this a listening program? Who knows? You're welcome to call. Please do. 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958. Let me reiterate, for the sake of identification, that the program is broadcasting live Monday through Friday from 12 noon to 1 p.m., possibly longer, depending upon guests and callers. I've committed myself to 12 noon to 1, and that I am taking calls. You will be on the air. You'll be heard. We can talk about any issues you care to talk about. And that the program, as of today, is carried by something like 7 or 8 live streams, including YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, Twitter, TikTok. I've got a bunch of other ones, DLive. And it's also archived on several sites as well. So I'm really expanding the footprint of the show, and I'm working to do that every day. Have you listened to the political parties in the past? All right, I don't know what you mean by that. Anyway, getting back to, I'm reading some TikTok comments here. Getting back to President Trump's speech. Mothers and children trapped in poverty in our inner cities. Rusted out factories scattered like tombstones across the landscape of our nation. An education system flush with cash, but which leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge. And the crime and the gangs and the drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. For many decades, we have enriched foreign industry at the expense of American industry, subsidized the armies of other countries while allowing for the very sad depletion of our military. Okay, now this is where President Trump gets into two things that are obvious and two things that he tried his best to address and did address, and we need to keep addressing. The first is the fact that our inner cities, our minorities, our communities of color have been damaged by and duped by the left going back to the 1960s. And that they need to wake up just like the rest of us and take on the mantle of sovereignty as citizens and demand that they have the right to freedom and the right to control their own destiny, the right to create economies, the right to preserve and advance their families. We all want the same things in this country. What has the left done to particularly the Black community in the 1960s is a scandal. It's racist in the real sense. The left is racist in this kind of a Rudyard Kipling white man's burden type of racism. They think they talk to Black people like they're children. They think they're smarter than them. Oh, we're going to take care of you. And what have they done? Well, in 1965, Lyndon Johnson's Undersecretary of Labor at the time, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a sociologist and who would go on to become a senator from New York, he issued a report where he expressed concern that the implementation of such programs as the War on Poverty and the national welfare infrastructure would damage and hurt Black communities and Black families. Now, we should note that at that time, the Black family was very intact. I mean, it was something like 80% of African Americans were married and had children. And in fact, marriage in the Black community, there's another sociologist who did some research on this. I don't remember his name. He's a Black sociologist. He found that after the Civil War, the Black family and the Black condition of marriage was much stronger than white people because they wanted to react to the horrors of slavery, where families were separated and sold into other families. I mean, this terrible genocidal agenda that had existed before the Civil War, they wanted to counteract that by strengthening their families. And that D.P. Moynihan was concerned that the implementation of national welfare plans to help people below the poverty line would divide families and hurt the Black community. And he advocated that such programs be conducted locally with maybe some government support or partnership with local government so that individuals could be responded to as such and their individual needs could be addressed based upon their unique conditions and in such a way that would advance their ability to remain involved in society in a meaningful way and be productive, instead of this cookie cutter nationalizing of that system, which is what happened. And it destroyed or seriously damaged the Black family. It gave incentive to women to not get married and to have the man leave the house and then to have children out of wedlock. So you had children, particularly young men, growing up without fathers. This was very bad socially. I don't think anyone denies that. You had the left attacking the Black church, starting with Margaret Sanger and her Negro Project in the late 30s, where she tried to get abortion clinics into Black neighborhoods by bribing local ministers. She knew that as a white person, they wouldn't listen to her, so she got ministers involved, and she corrupted the church in the process. You have anti-business attitudes, which prevented Black entrepreneurialism with high taxes and regulations. You had, as I said, the damage to the Black family by these welfare programs and other programs of like nature. And the result was inevitable. You had unemployed Black men, and that led to more violence. And the final arbiter, plus you had the introduction of the drug trade. I don't know if I want to get into this too much, but there was a reporter from the San Jose Mercury, I think it was. I interviewed him years ago. He committed suicide, apparently, who wrote about how the government and the CIA, he claimed, had brought drugs into the inner city for profit and for control. In the 1960s, you had the MK Ultra movement, where you had psychologists like Jolyon West, and you had people like Albert from Ram Dass from Harvard and Timothy Leary, all CIA, introducing and glamorizing the use of drugs. All these things were meant to control people. All these things hurt, particularly minority communities. And so the result is socially that, and by the way, in spite of all of this, Black people and people of color have risen up in terms of becoming middle class and becoming successful and overcoming these anti-business, anti-American programs to become successes. But yet it has kept some people locked into poverty. Not to mention the other spoke on the wheel is public education, which turned our education system from one based upon cognitive learning, teaching young people to think independently, learning how to read with phonics, learning how to think, independently and become sovereign as citizens, to one based on behaviorism, one based upon a politicization of education, one based on look-say reading, which scrambled young people's brains. And minority students were particularly vulnerable to this because their families had already been compromised by the big state welfare programs. The drugs had already been introduced into their neighborhoods. The anti-business attitudes had already hurt their ability to create business. And the compromise of the Black church had led to a diminution of spiritual and moral alternatives. And so they were more hurt by these massive public schools than white people. And by the way, it was the Trump administration that advocated, choice in terms of going to charter schools. It was Betsy DeVos who was involved with that. And that was opposed by the left and the big fat teachers unions, particularly the National Education Association, which wants to keep young Black students locked into these inner city schools where they can be treated like psychological guinea pigs for their behavioral experiments. Talk about racist. And so finally, socially, the last line of defense, the last people left who can actually help address the problems that the left had predominantly created, were the local police. They're not perfect. You have some bad apples. But for the most part, these were men and women, and by the way, a large percentage of them were people of color, who go out every day, put on a uniform, risk their lives trying to keep these neighborhoods safe so that the 99% of people who still are trying to get to work, or the children who are trying to play in their front yards, can function. And so what does the left do? They come for them. They come for the last structure that protects those citizens and allows people to begin to break out and get ahead. They come for them by defunding them, by allowing these gangs, these radical leftist shock troops, to roam these neighborhoods, looting Black businesses, burning Black neighborhoods, murdering Black people, including children in Chicago. That's what they do. Anyway, getting back to President Trump's speech. And by the way, you're welcome to join the broadcast. What is on your mind this afternoon? 617-396-4958 is the number. 617-396-4958. let's see. So the first part of this, these comments were talking about how President Trump wanted to restore these compromised communities and these neighborhoods, which had been run by corrupt Democrat machines for decades. These same corrupt machines, which, by the way, cheated Trump out of the election in places like Philadelphia and Detroit. He wanted to try to help people recognize this and realize it, and thus overcome it and begin to come out of it by operating in their own interest. And I think he made progress in that way. I think he woke up a lot of people, particularly people of color. Here in Massachusetts, for example, where I live, Trump did better in Boston. He did better in communities like Lawrence and Fall River and Holyoke, which have predominant Hispanic populations. He did better among, I think, Asians, and he did better even among my fellow Jews, believe it or not. I mean, I would never have thought that. And so I think that that's a trend that is not going to be stopped. I think that's going to continue. I think that's going to continue to grow. Then he goes on to talk a little bit about foreign policy, and this is something that I think is a huge success for President Trump, because he put America first in the world stage. And by doing so, he inspired other nations to put their nations first in their dealings with the rest of the world, as it should be. He reasserted an old-fashioned idea, one that actually does, again, go back to the, I suppose, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Hebrews, and one that is obviously a part of nature, one that obviously even the animal kingdom understands, and that is the right to sovereignty, national sovereignty, the development of the nation state as a progressive idea, as an entity that protects democratic rights. He reasserted that. That's one of the big reasons why the left despise Trump also, because they're into this mentally ill, demented idea that somehow national sovereignty and borders are superstitions and anachronisms that should be done away with in exchange for a world order where we become one big international ant colony. That's what they believe, this bizarre communist idea. Trump rejected that. Other presidents in the past have talked about this. They've talked about securing our borders. They've talked about America's place in the world. But everybody knows they didn't mean it. There's just a lot of flowery rhetoric, a lot of double talk, a lot of code. Well, Donald Trump meant it. He put America first. He believed in making his own nation great, just like he wanted to make his individual family great, just like he wanted to make his own life great. That's natural. That's what we are. That's wired into who we are as human beings. You want to put yourself first before your neighbor. You want to put your family first before your neighbor's family. You want to put your community first before other communities. And you want to put your nation first before other nations. This is normal. This is natural. Animals understand this. Plants understand this. This is existence. This is what God gave us to understand our identities and how they are separate from the identities of others. Then we can all live together in reasonable harmony with conflicts. Then we can all help each other, but only when we understand who we are first and we put our own interests first. When you as an individual put your interests first, it's only then that you're in a position where you can help your neighbor. Same thing with nations. If our nation puts its interests first and the rights of its sovereign citizens first, then it can help other nations. The answer for the left is to create, to sacrifice that and to turn us into a kind of an ant colony or a sort of a appendage, a province of the world. Trump rejected that. And that's one of the reasons also why the left despises Trump. And it's something that's normal and natural, as I said. He did this. He put America first in the world. He improved our military, which creates peace. And at the same time, he withdrew our entanglements with other nations, as George Washington so greatly said in his farewell address. You know, he de-escalated foreign wars. Wasn't that used to be a cause of the left, to de-escalate? I seem to recall Marvin Gaye. Remember the song? I don't know. We all want to de-escalate, right? Isn't that something the left used to support? Stopping these perpetual wars that we've been engaged in since World War I? Donald Trump meant this, and he did it. He defeated ISIS with very few casualties, if any. He just dropped a big fat bomb on them. You know, he occasionally would throw a bomb here and there, but he de-escalated that war. He withdrew American troops from the ongoing imbroglio in Afghanistan, the swamp. He withdrew American troops from Iraq. He did not engage in a war in Syria. He forced the NATO allies to pay for their own defense to the tune of billions of dollars, and began the process of withdrawing American personnel from a theater that was won in World War II, and at the same time supporting our allies. He encouraged peace with North Korea. I know it didn't quite work out the way we all wanted to work out. Nothing is perfect. But we should note that since Trump has been in office, at least after the first 6 months, North Korea is no longer throwing missiles over the Sea of Japan. They're no longer testing nuclear devices. They've generally been more peaceful. He defended our allies. Hello, you're on the air. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Charles, it's Phoebe. How are you?
I'm good, Phoebe. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Charles, you were talking about how President Trump was trying to de-escalate the wars that were going on.
Yes, I was.
Mm-hmm. East. 4 years ago, when he was running, I always felt that the Republicans, especially the Republicans, because I perceive the Republicans as the war party. I know the Democrats are too.
Right.
The Republicans are the biggest warmongers. And it's for that reason, I believe, it's my opinion, that it's for that reason that they stabbed President Trump in the back to the very end, because of his strong stance against the wars.
Oh, I think that's one of the big reasons. I don't think there's any question. I mean, the neocons who got us involved in the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, yeah, they now they're coming back too. I mean, you've got this guy who I think Biden has nominated for Secretary of State, this guy Blinken. He gave a speech a few months back where he said we should get involved in a war with Syria. We want to send troops. So we're going back to that. We're going to go back to the policy, as the historian Charles Austin Beard called it, perpetual war for perpetual peace. That's been the policy of American foreign policy since World War I. And we're going back to it, and it's horrible. Donald Trump was a peace president. We had no wars during his 4 years. He would occasionally drop a strategic bomb here and there, but there was no expansion of war. There was a de-escalation of war, and there was a more peaceful world, I may add, as a result of it.
I agree, and I believe it's precisely for that reason. I think this issue of war, I believe, is ultimately the heart of the matter as to why this satanic, and I'm not saying this just to say this, but I honestly believe with all my heart this government is loaded with Satanists that want to get rid of him because of his anti-war stance.
I agree with you entirely. I mean, I don't know if they're literal Satanists in that they are practicing satanic ritual like whoever's behind the QAnon says. I don't know that, but I don't doubt it. They are effectively they're Satanists.
I've never put any trust or any my head into QAnon, because I'm starting to wonder if the QAnon thing was anti-Trump.
Look, I don't trust it because I need to know I need to see somebody sign something. I mean, you have to be able to hear a person step up and say who they are. Otherwise, I don't trust anything, whether I agree with it or not. I mean, it reminds me back in the day when I used to have a show and I'd get people coming on with me talking about space aliens and flying saucers. And I had this one guy really insist that he sees a spaceship in Colorado and that he described it. And I said, look, send me a round trip ticket. I'll fly out there, meet me at the airport, take me to the site, and I'll look at it. And if you show me, then I'll talk about it. Otherwise, forget it. And of course, he couldn't do that.
But because the thing is, like, for 4 years, like, this whole QAnon thing was saying, oh, Trump is going to do this, and he's going to arrest this person, he's going to do this, and that, and that, and that. And it kind of, like, you wonder if it was a psychological operation to create this cult-like following.
I have no idea. I've tried to find out. I've asked some people, even on this program, who I would assume would know about this, and none of them really want to comment on it. I think I asked Dr. Jerome Corsi about it. He had no comment. He doesn't know. So, I wouldn't trust it. I take a jaundiced eye. I have no problem with the idea of investigating pedophilia and satanic practices. But and I agree with them on that. But other than that, I don't trust them.
They're starting to use, one of the things that they're holding against Trump right now is QAnon. And so I'm wondering if QAnon was created for the purposes of ultimately leading to it being used against him. You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying, and I actually wouldn't doubt it. And by the way, in that vein, I want to mention, excuse me, I was listening to Alex Jones the other day. And he is telling people, because there's going to be this kind of protest movement in Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day, he's suggesting, and I join him, that we don't go, that we stay home, because he feels that this is a deep state operation. It's a false flag. We're already in a position right now because of the so-called breach of the Capitol, which, by the way, was peaceful. No property was damaged, a couple of broken windows. It was not violent. It was wrong, and the people should be arrested because they were trespassing.
There was a woman killed.
She was killed by police, and wrongfully. But the point is that this is being used now like the Reichstag fire was used in Nazi Germany. It's being used as an excuse to suspend civil liberties. There are people who want to, and round people up as so-called insurrectionists. They're using words like terrorist. And I think that, it makes me think that this might have been a false flag, that it was set up that way. But even if whether it was or not, and I have no idea, I think it probably wasn't actually. I think it was just some couple of over-rambunctious protesters who decided to go into the Capitol. But either way, it's being used like that. And this thing happening on Inauguration Day, you could have people threading the crowd, let's say, who might be Antifa people, whoever, who might do some things that are violent. And that'll be used even more so by those who want to, take away our rights and lock us up, maybe. I don't know. Anyway,
they want to take, like, they're freezing. Certain banks are freezing Trump's assets, and like millions of dollars are being, like, what are you guys gonna do? Like, the guys like you who are out there speaking, what are you going to do when they start doing this stuff to you? Because I'm starting to get
I don't know.
scared.
I'm doing the best I can. I would not be at all surprised if I find out tomorrow morning when I turn on my YouTube to find that the whole thing's been wiped out. I mean, it's happening to people I know. And, they're freezing bank accounts. They're trying to stop. That's been going on for a while. I mean, they did that to Gab. They shut off PayPal shut off their ability to take subscriptions. I mean, this is a war. I mean, this is an all-out. And look, as I said earlier, this is the literal definition of fascism. Fascism is not outright government ownership of everything, which is communism, when the government itself becomes the corporation. Fascism is when government works hand in glove with a select group of corporations in partnership to control a country and to control everything in it. That's where we're heading. That's why I say that we're looking at a Nazi or fascist-like development here. You have, the big social media basically deciding to purge President Trump himself from having a voice. They've removed Parler, which was a big group. I mean, it was a $1 billion company. They just simply have them wiped out. I mean, that's destroying the voice of major people. There were people on Parler who had, hundreds of thousands of followers. They're now not going to be able to communicate with them anymore. It's over. It's complete censorship. And they're doing it in partnership. They've got Twitter, and apparently there was collusion between Twitter, Google, and Apple. And as this new administration comes in, do you think they're going to do anything about that? I'm not saying they're going to sit down with them and form like Mussolini did, a council of corporations, although they are apparently bringing some of these people into the government. But what they're doing is by doing nothing or by turning a blind eye, they are, in the de facto sense, working within a fascist system. Anyways, Phoebe, I'm afraid I might have already said too much. I'm getting nervous even talking about this, and that's troubling right there. Anyway, thanks a lot, Phoebe. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
All
Take
right.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Okay, and you're welcome to join me in the final segment here. Looks like it's already after 1 o'clock. Having such a great time, 617-396-4958. What is on your mind this afternoon? 617-396-4958. I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to be coming back at 2 p.m. with a guest, that being Michael Shaw, who's a regular on my program, and who does we do political talk. He's going to be coming on with me, I believe, at 2 o'clock. So I think I'm going to take a break. And you're welcome to join me at that time. It's now a little after the top of the hour. It's about 15 after the hour. You're welcome to join me at that time. I'd appreciate it. You're welcome to come on down, and we can talk then. In the meantime, I want to thank